the success in some circles of these DSA candidates should be a red alert for the Democratic Party.
They better speak truth to its most extreme base, or they're going to let a small faction of radicals drive more people toward Donald Trump.
There is a small group of far-left extremists gaining influence.
Democratic socialists who now have a chokehold all over the Democratic Party.
The reality is very, very scary. At this point, a majority of the governing board is controlled by people who are explicitly communist.
They attach themselves to popular causes. They take real concerns about healthcare, housing, police misconduct, and use them to sell what is actually an authoritarian worldview.
They want to toss out our Constitution, eliminate all checks and balances. They want to concentrate power, control entirely the means of production.
Or you move in this incredibly authoritarian way, right, where you get secret police, people being rounded up and brutalized. And I'm afraid that that's what we're seeing in DSA right now.
These are people who even 10 or 15 years ago would have been relegated to the outer extreme fringes of the Democrat Party.
Over a 10-year period, we saw the organization just become more and more extreme.
10 years ago, when I would interview DSA people, socialists, etc., they would say to me very soberly, they would go, listen, David, I'm a socialist, you're not, but our next stops on this bus are the same.
When I say extreme left, I mean really extreme left. You see it on the position with Israel.
What's been called the Red-Green Alliance, which is definitely a short-term arrangement between Islamic fascism and socialism.
This Islamo communist alliance. I mean, the left should have no rightful association with the Islamic fucking Guard of Iran.
I regularly get emails and see comments from people saying, you're with us or against us.
In order for us to be progressives, we now have to believe ideas and support ideas that are completely nuts.
These are people
dressing as Mao.
Piker, in those Mao pajamas.
Hasan Piker was dressed like Mao.
I put together that compilation to showcase the class solidarity between wealthy liberals and wealthy fascists who both feel threatened by the rise of socialism. And if it feels like they're more hysterical than ever before, that's because they are. Because they're trying to whip people into a frenzy before Tuesday's primaries, where multiple socialist and socialist-adjacent candidates are going to face off against their establishment opponents, including Abdul El-Sayed, Donovan McKinney, Kyle Blomquist, Shama Sawant, Cori Bush, Hartzell Gray, just to name a few. So if they're able to get you to second-guess your support for these so-called extremists, then maybe they'll convince people to change their votes and stop the dam from bursting for a little bit longer. And listen, I don't blame them for being afraid, because the success of 3 Mamdani-backed candidates was an undeniable turning point in American politics. But if socialists get another 3 victories on Tuesday, or possibly 4 or 5, maybe even 6 in a single night, I think that most people would begin to feel like socialism is unstoppable, which could create a bandwagon effect that ultimately seals the fate of the establishment. So it's make or break, which is why centrists and fascists are both shrieking louder than ever before. But regardless of the outcome, it's not going to change the fact that our country right now is at a crossroads. Our political establishment has thoroughly failed us. And they failed us so badly that the only viable form of politics right now is populism, like it or not. The question is, given the choice between right-wing pseudo-populism in the form of fascist demagoguery and left-wing economic populism in the form of class warfare and socialism, which side are we going to choose? Because the choice really does seem binary at this point. The Democratic Party's base is increasingly choosing to side with socialists because they want to stop fascists. And they know that more neoliberal incrementalism isn't going to stave off the threat of fascism. However, some Democratic Party politicians, as well as liberal anti-Trump Sloptubers, are temporarily teaming up with the people they supposedly hate the most, which is fascists, to defeat the socialists, because the threat of communism to them is a greater concern than the clear and present danger posed by fascism. But for the record, if you're worried about communism while the fascists are in control of the entire country, your brain is broken. Full stop. And I think that AOC put it best when she was asked about the supposed threat of communism in the United States of America.
But isn't there concern that, this slippery slope towards socialism inevitably ends up as full-blown communism. I mean, no.
I'm not concerned about America turning into a communist country in like a year. That is like, I think that is, oh, sorry. I think that's, I think it's very silly. I think you just think about how impossible it has been to raise the minimum wage in America in 10, 15, 20 years. We can't even raise the minimum wage. Do Republicans really think that this stuff is going to happen? No, they don't. They're trying to scare people because they don't want us talking about the fact that we all have a right to health care in this country. So they want to call it communist, and they want to call everything they don't like communist, because if people actually wake up to the fact that their elected officials are screwing them over when they get here, then they're going to realize that they deserve better, and that healthcare as a right isn't crazy. It isn't pie in the sky. They want to call this stuff communist because they don't want us to realize that the rest of the developed world has guaranteed healthcare in this country. So they want to call it communist because they don't want you to know that Germany, Italy, the UK, Canada, everybody else has it better than us, and we spend the most amount of money for the worst care in the modern developed world.
And of course, she's 100% right. If we can't even raise the fucking minimum wage in this country, I don't think that communism is necessarily right around the corner. Call me crazy, but I just feel like that doesn't seem plausible in the near future. Hell, I'm skeptical about whether or not basic social democracy is even possible in this country in the next 100 years, given how fucked up and regressive our political system is. But it behooves wealthy people to get poor people to think that socialism is a threat to them too, because getting poor people to think that they could be the next Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk helps to reinforce this idea that the rigged capitalist economy should never change, seeing as how it could one day benefit them too. As George Carlin put it, it's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. And if the peasants actually started to wake up and realize that they've been lied to about capitalism all these years, then they might start demanding more. They might start calling for a fair and equitable system, which the elites don't want because they monetarily benefit from the exploitative capitalist system. Now, having said that, I don't fault Americans who feel skeptical or ambivalent towards socialism, because it takes years to undo the capitalist brainwashing that we've all been subjected to. But I want to set the record straight. The reason why their go-to method of attack against socialism is always fear-mongering is because, as AOC said, they don't want to address the merits of the arguments that the socialists are making, because they would lose every single time. It's easier to just lie and get you to equate socialism with authoritarianism, so that way you don't even bother to learn anything about socialism in the first place. But in actuality, socialism is not inherently authoritarian. To the contrary, socialism is an expansion of democracy, albeit to the workplace. See, if we elect political leaders, then why shouldn't we also elect our bosses? If we value freedom of speech, why should we allow tyrannical employers to dictate what we say in the workplace? Does freedom of speech not also extend there as well? If not, why? Why should a small handful of executives make life-altering decisions about company policy changes and layoffs without any democratic input from their workers whatsoever? See, Americans have been conditioned to value freedom and liberty, so it is downright hypocritical for the same leaders who taught us to value freedom and liberty to reject those same ideals in the workplace. It's a discrepancy that they've never addressed. And since they can't just say, well, employers should be able to be tyrannical dictators who aren't going to let you benefit from the fruits of your labor, that makes them sound bad. So they have to lie about socialism and claim that it's inherently authoritarian, when ironically, they're the ones literally arguing for authoritarianism in the workplace by supporting capitalism, because that is what capitalism is. It is authoritarianism. You have no say in your job whatsoever. If you don't comply with every single demand of your abusive employer and you don't let them exploit you in perpetuity, you could lose your livelihood. Now, the capitalists would respond to that and argue that you could just find another job. You have the freedom to sell your labor to a better employer. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. But that's nothing more than the illusion of choice, because our system incentivizes greed. So finding an employer who won't actually exploit your labor is almost impossible in our late-stage capitalist system. I mean, most companies don't even want their employees to have labor unions, because they know that even the smallest shred of power threatens their ability to milk their workers for as much profits as possible. And that greed inevitably seeps into the democratic process, where capitalists then buy off politicians to change the rules to enable even more exploitation in the pursuit of profit maximization. It's why capitalist systems always devolve into fascist regimes, because democracy itself becomes a threat to the capitalist class. Therefore, fascists come along and they reinforce capitalism by force. We're seeing that right now with Donald Trump. Now, that's not to say that communist countries aren't immune from authoritarianism, because that's obviously not the case, unfortunately. But guess what? Most capitalist regimes around the world are also authoritarian regimes, because most countries are capitalist and most countries are also authoritarian. But we only associate socialism with authoritarianism because the ruling class has a vested interest in making us believe that a non-capitalist alternative would be detrimental to us. So they'll point to Cuba and they'll point to Venezuela and say, that's what's in store for America if we go down that same path, while not telling you that it's low-key our fault for those countries' failures, believe it or not. Because you can't say that socialism failed after you've sanctioned socialist countries into oblivion for decades. You can't tell me that authoritarianism is an inevitability in socialist countries when our country's nonstop meddling in socialist countries, particularly in Latin America, in the interest of capital, mind you, caused their leaders to centralize power in autocratic ways in the first place, because they felt like locking down their entire country was the only way that they could thwart imperial meddling from the United States and other countries. That's not a justification for authoritarianism, by the way. It's merely cause and effect. When you have a threat that is external, countries are less likely to be democratic because they feel more insulated and protected from that external threat if they are authoritarian. But that context and nuance is almost always omitted because, again, the most effective way to get working people to continue to support an economic system that's harmful to them is to scare the shit out of them about the alternative. But it's funny that their scare tactics always sound really familiar. Do you ever notice that? So a month ago, I saw this AI-generated picture juxtaposing wealthy socialist leaders feasting while citizens were forced to ration half a loaf of bread. And I pointed out that this is literally how Americans are currently living under capitalism. Income and wealth inequality has surpassed Gilded Age levels under capitalism, yet we're supposed to believe that cronyism and corruption are exclusive features to socialist countries. That makes no sense. Give me a break. But that's the thing about these people. They don't want to explain why they think socialism is bad because they always end up describing capitalism. In the compilation that you watched at the beginning of this video, Sean Hannity, of all people, who supports our autocratic president, accused socialists, of all people, of wanting to do what Donald Trump did and get rid of checks and balances and centralized power. And I'm sorry, but you don't get to say that and claim that it's bad if you support Project 2025's implementation of unitary executive theory. So shut the fuck up, Sean Hannity. But if you look at the evidence that he gives, well, let's go to the screenshot. He cites the DSA wanting to eliminate the Senate as well as the presidency and reform the judiciary. He also points to how they're calling for amnesty for immigrants, which is what Ronald Reagan supported, by the way, but he's not going to tell you that. And also defunding the Department of War, which just means that rather than spending $1.5 trillion of our discretionary budget on killing people, what if we spent like $200 billion on the military instead and use the rest of that money to actually feed and educate people? See, I don't think that that's actually very radical. In fact, I think it's common sense given how it's the norm in comparable OECD countries. But they can't just be honest because the goal is to scare, not educate, which is why you see so many of them clutching their pearls at the idea of eliminating the Senate and the presidency. In other words, they want you to think that the DSA is extremist because they favor a unicameral parliamentary system like Canada and many other European countries. Now, listen, there are pros and cons to the presidential and parliamentary systems. I personally prefer a parliamentary system, but I actually don't like that the executive isn't directly elected. But I mean, that's why there are hybrid systems with presidents and prime ministers. We're talking about basic forms of democratic governance that you learn about in Political Science 101. But if you pretend that these changes are actually going to facilitate authoritarianism, then you help sell Americans on this idea that socialism is scary, because think of all these changes. They want to abolish the executive branch that we currently have and replace it with a very common executive branch that we see around the world. It's just outrageous. And listen, to be clear, having a parliamentary system isn't related to socialism at all, but the goal, as you saw, is to attribute all possibly bad things to socialism and all scary and unfamiliar things to socialism. The former DSA member, by the way, that you heard from in that compilation, said with a straight face that he's concerned that the DSA is going to usher in a totalitarian dystopia with secret police that'll kidnap people when the ICE Gestapo is literally fucking doing that right now under capitalism. Like, would it be worse if the socialists did that? I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. But this is the level of intellectual honesty that you can expect from these people. You stub your toe? Well, blame socialism. Like, that's the level of discourse. You shit your pants? The socialists made you do it. They made you fart and shit your pants. You shouldn't have trusted that fart. Socialists made you do it. They're trying to prime you to associate socialism with all bad things, including terrorism, because since the socialists also think that genocide is bad and they believe that the war with Iran is wrong, then it logically follows that they tacitly support the religious and political aims of the IRGC too, because as you all know, you endorse everything about a particular group of people if you don't think that they should be indiscriminately murdered. Makes total fucking sense. I mean, their level of dishonesty really speaks to how desperate they are. They're trying to throw everything at the wall to see what sticks. But I expect fascists to say anything to stop socialism, because socialists really are the biggest opponents and the strongest opponents to their hyper-capitalist fascist ideology, which is why fascists will go out of their way to target and repress socialists and communists. Hitler did it, Pinochet did it, and under NSPM 7, the Trump regime is trying to do the very same thing by designating socialist and socialist-adjacent people as the greatest domestic terror threat in the country by targeting them and labor leaders and even some liberals as potential terror suspects, who, to be clear, are capitalists. If you are a liberal or even a social democrat, you are definitionally a capitalist. So that's why I think it's sad but not surprising to see so many liberals team up with fascists to attack socialists at a time when the fascists are going out of their way to persecute people who oppose their ideology. Because you're really showing your true colors right now. If during this time, when fascists are controlling everything and they're targeting the left, like if you join that hate campaign against the left, you are showing your whole ass right now. But it's not just, anti-Trump Sloptubers like David Pakman who are doing this. In a hit piece published in Politico about Abdul El-Sayed, they quote Democratic lawmakers as well as advocates like Shannon Watts, Fred Gutenberg, and Neera Tanden to also shit on him because Abdul El-Sayed dared to call John Fetterman an ogre, which he is. And the thing about Abdul is that he calls himself a capitalist. He's not even a socialist, but it doesn't matter because his policies still pose a threat to the capital class. If he cancels medical debt and he gets Medicare for All passed, then a for-profit industry stands to lose billions and billions of dollars every single year. They profit off of our pain and suffering, and they desperately want to keep that system intact so they can continue to make money off of our health, which is immoral, but they don't care because they put profits above people. But I mean, even if you just threaten capital minimally, and you just support Medicare for all, but you're still a capitalist, and you don't want workers to own the means of production, you're still going to go into the blender with socialists, which is why it is you basically cutting off your nose to spite your faces to align with fascists to attack the left, because the bigger threat, regardless if you are a liberal or leftist, is fascists. Hence why it's so stupid for liberal Sloptubers like David Pakman to legitimize right-wing fear-mongering about socialists, because they view him in the same way that they view us. But the question is, why? Like, why exactly is he doing this? And if you listen to his comments on Gavin Newsom's shitty podcast, it seems like this is purely grievance-filled, although I do have my doubts. Nonetheless, let's hear it straight from the horse's mouth first.
I regularly get emails and see comments from people saying, you're with us or against us. It doesn't matter if we agree on universal health care and a few other things. We believe housing should be government owned and people are assigned a house and blah, blah, blah. I go, I don't believe that. Do I think people should be homeless? No. Can I point to things that have been done in St. Louis and in Salt Lake City to just give people housing and how it's actually cheaper than having them on the streets? Yes, for homeless folks, that absolutely. But I'm not a take away private ownerships and then then you're simply not part of the same movement. This is not everybody, but these are some of the conversations I've had. So I feel like the tone of these conversations is very different today than it was 8-10 years ago.
So in his view, DSA leftists are much more hardline than they were before. Therefore, they're a threat to the Democratic Party that they have to address. Now, Is it possible that David Pakman is experiencing something similar to Anna Kasparian's crash out, where she decided to leave the left after leftists were mean to her on Twitter? I mean, sure, that's possible, right? But I don't think that David Pakman has ever been one to be easily influenced by criticism, because he's had a plethora of dogshit takes over the years about, Bolivia, about Democratic politicians in particular, propping up Richie Torres, a genocidaire. So I don't think that in particular has catalyzed this shift in him. And I'm pretty sure that he was complaining about litmus tests 10 years ago too. So I think that this is another one of those APAC, IPAC moments from David Pakman where he is deliberately playing dumb.
APAC or IPAC. I don't even know how it's pronounced. APAC, IPAC.
Sure, David, you are so fucking full of shit, and you know it. I think that David knows that the DSA, or leftists in general, they haven't really changed over the last 10 years. It's more that the conditions have changed more specifically. Israel committed a genocide. That's the elephant in the room that he doesn't want to address, and the left opposes that genocide. David Pakman doesn't seem to share that same sympathy, given how he took a picture with the man who perpetrated that genocide against the Palestinian people. And before that, back in October of 2023, David Pakman lambasted Rashida Tlaib for daring to claim that Israel bombed a hospital and suggested that she should take responsibility and delete that tweet. But further into the genocide, after hospital bombings became a routine phenomenon for Israel, David Pakman decided to just never mention the subject again, and his own audience wasn't happy about that. They were angered by his genocide coverage, or lack thereof, because they thought that his progressive values would logically extend to the people of Palestine, but that seemingly wasn't the case. So I think that he's using socialism, if I had to guess, as a synonym for anti-Zionism, because it's much easier to criticize the same people you already don't like under the guise of their economic policies than it is to criticize them directly for opposing a genocide. That's an indefensible position to have. Nobody wants to be on the side of the country committing a genocide, and if you respond in a way that legitimizes or defends it in any way, shape, or form, you're going to get pushback from your own progressive audience. Rightfully so, might I add. And look, I don't know what's in David Pakman's heart, but if you listen to more of his conversation with Gavin Newsom, he demonstrates that he's much more savvy than these other liberals who are attacking leftists and socialists. He admits that centrist Democrats do have to do more than just more milquetoast incrementalism to defeat the fascists. So it seems like by his own logic and standards, he should actually be in lockstep with the DSA, at least to shift the Overton window more to the left to get better Democrats to defeat the fascists. But here he is aligning with fascists and coincidentally saying the same thing they're saying about the extremism that we see from the socialist left. It just, there's a disconnect there, right? But again, I don't know what's in his heart, but it's hard to believe that angry emails got David Pakman to turn on the entire DSA movement. Having said that, I think he is correct to conflate socialists with anti-Zionists, because even if the two aren't inextricably linked, the same motivations that drive someone towards socialism are the same motivations that also drive people towards anti-Zionism. I, for one, am a socialist because I believe in equity and human rights, and I'm an anti-Zionist because I don't think that you can achieve those democratic ideals under an apartheid ethno-state. But some liberals will oppose the socialist left because of their foreign policy, right? They're going to align with fascists and support them over socialists because they don't agree with their foreign policy. Some are going to oppose them for different reasons, because they threaten their wealth and power. But the underlying reasons why they oppose socialists have the same exact root. Socialists fundamentally threaten the status quo that they all desperately want to protect. But the good news is that it's a free country, and they are more than welcome to compete with us in democratic primaries and in the marketplace of ideas. But all I ask is that they drop the phony-ass bullshit and just be fucking honest about why they actually hate socialists. It's not because we're authoritarian or extremists. They know that. It's because we fundamentally believe that all human beings should be equal in all facets of life, and they don't. They want to uphold the current system of exploitation, inequality, and abuse, and since they'd look like assholes for just admitting that, they have to cloak their arguments in fear-mongering and concern trolling to make socialists look like we're the bad guys. But don't let them bullshit you. The only people who should actually be afraid of socialists are the oligarchs who want to continue to hoard wealth at the expense of everyone else.
Alpha male, not a beta male.